Greetings, everybody. I'm Scott Rodell here at the Great Word Taoist Center, home to our Academy of Chinese Swordsmanship. Here I have this really fine example of a Chinese sword breaker, really interesting, beautiful piece. There are two types of Chinese sword breakers. One is like this. This is a bian, has this sort of fluted, segmented shaft. And the other type is a jian, not to be confused with a jian. It has a double-edged straight sword, but a jian, same sound, different character, different tone, and that sword breaker has a squared cross section. Vast majority of these are made out of iron. They're really heavy, sturdy weapons. Sometimes they're made out of wood, but I've only seen a couple of wood examples. Maybe they didn't survive because they're wood, but the vast majority of them are made of iron, like this example. This one is a real beast of a weapon. It's 4 pounds, 2 ounces. So it's really a very heavy weapon. That's a little over 1,800 grams. The length of the weapon itself is 28 inches from the pommel to the tip. The shaft of the weapon, where it comes out of its dragon's mouth here, is 20 and a half. That's 72 centimeters, or 53 for the shaft or blade, if you will. Bian, these are often also called the tie bian, iron whip. Obviously, it's not very whippy, but bian, same term is used for whips. And it has these very, very solid, heavy brass fittings on it. So it really balances. It's about the same length overall as a duan dao or duan jian, but at 4 pounds, it weighs about twice what your average duan dao would. So that really tells us a lot about how this thing was wielded. You know, that's whenever I get my hands on an antique weapon and I'm able to swing it around, I really want to get a sense of, like, how was this weapon used? You know, it tells me a lot about swordsmanship back in the day. And if I was wielding my jian or whatever weapon I had, what would it be like to face something like this? If I've wielded it, it gives me some idea. And this thing, I mean, I'm not kidding when I say this is a real beast of a weapon. I can definitely give a good solid thrust, but boy, even holding it there, 4 pounds, you feel it. It'd be hard to give a quick little pea cut like you could with a duan dao. You know, you can give a quick little cut. You wouldn't have to, invest a lot. You wouldn't have to be necessarily that lethal of a cut, but a quick pump. You could do that with a duan dao fairly easily. But this one is really hard to stop it. When you do, you feel like, whoa, it's going to pull you. It's a really, really heavy, powerful weapon. And that, generally the jian and the bian that I've been able to handle have that real forward balance. It really wants to strike hard. And so you can tell when you would swing these kinds of things, you really have to keep it moving. It's an iron truncheon. It's an iron billy club. It's going to hit with real power and authority. And however you're striking with this thing, boom, you're going to have to keep it moving, because even there, just trying to stop it there could really feel the pull on my wrist. I really want to swing it around and bring it back. So a very different kind of weapon. Although it's the length and the grip is very similar to a dao. Well, actually, that grip is large and shaped like a jian, I should say. So grip-wise, in that, it's very similar to other weapons in its sort of proportions, but the weight and balance of it is quite different than swinging a sword, even a duan jian or duan dao. By the way, if you're interested in Chinese sword arts, definitely check out the link below for the Academy of Chinese Swordsmanship. We have weekly webinars for several weapons. There are regular in-person seminars around the country, here in the US, up in Canada, over in Europe, even down in Australia. We've got lots of stuff going on. And for those really serious and want to level up their skills, we have intensive retreats for the people, especially looking to become instructors. So if swordsmanship is your thing, contact Swordplay. Please do check out that link. You'll be happy that you did. When I pick up a weapon like this, I'm always thinking to myself, like, who would have handled this? Whose weapon was this? That's always, what kind of guy was wielding this? In what purpose? What scenario was it wielded? And so first thing is, well, yes, I can definitely give a very powerful strike. Whatever angle it's coming at, bang, you're going to hit somebody really hard. That's a telling blow. But also, in a sense, it's less lethal. If you whack somebody in the thigh with this, it's going to give them a hell of a bruise. but that's not as bad as a slash from a blade, a duan dao or duan jin even. That's going to cut, and especially previous era, the cut could be lethal from an infection, not just from the hit. So who would have wielded this? Well, I think one real possibility is in every city, the magistrate had constables, right? They're sort of like the police force at the time, not like our modern police force. One thing in particular, they didn't have to, there wasn't any concerns about police brutality. So you have to send the constables out for public order, had to send them out to arrest some criminal, to apprehend somebody. They don't want to necessarily kill that guy. They want to capture him. They're going to bind him. He's going to fight back. You're going to give him a whack with this. I mean, just a small tap on with this on the ribs. You're going to behave if you get hit with this. I mean, a poke in the gut, you're going to do what you're told. Once you have apprehended that criminal, you got to take him through town. Maybe he's got friends, gawkers. You want to get them out of the way. Just kind of threatening somebody with this. They're going to step back. This is like being hit with a big crowbar. This is really be something you wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of. So I think those constables, working for the city magistrates, that would be one guy who would have this. The other is obviously caravan guards and bodyguards. They have a very similar job. Imagine, you're in charge of this caravan. It's full of, expensive goods. You've been paid to guard it. You get to town, you got to get down the main road. Lots of people getting away. Maybe someone are going to try to steal something. It's your job to make sure these goods are delivered safe and sound. You can get people out of the way. You draw a sword and you give somebody a cut. No, I think there's a lot less chance that the local magistrate's going to look the other way if there's a bleeding guy, even if he's a peasant. If you whack somebody and you give them a bruise and, hey, they're a bit of a troublemaker, probably they can get away with that. So I could see bodyguards for higher officials, for rich guys, caravan guards, definitely going to have these sort of sword breakers, these sort of bien or the jin. Another interesting thing about this one is its damage. So we know it's been used because it has a couple of cuts in the blade. These are really interesting to me. I really, really like it when I get my hands on a weapon that has been used and shows that kind of battle damage. It tells us lots of things. Here, you have two cuts, one here and one here, and this cut is deep. I can get my fingernail in there. It goes in, I'd say it's about at least 3 millimeters deep. This one's not quite as deep, but it's also there. These aren't scratches. These are cuts into the iron. Iron is obviously not soft. This isn't wood. This is iron. What does that tell us? Chinese blades, both the Jian and the Dao, have very hard cutting edges. They're typically made of a san-mei construction, 3-plate construction. And that central core plate is very high, very hard carbon steel. Hard enough that it can cut into iron. That's really interesting. And there it is. There's the evidence. There's, like, you might even say, proof that these blades are really hard edges and can cut right into iron. That also tells us, by the way, we've discussed why don't Chinese sword arts parry with the edge? Why do Chinese sword arts, as an orthodox fashion, deflect with the flat of the blade? Because those very hard edges, those edges that are hard enough to cut into iron, are also, when those two would collide, two blade edges collide directly like that, they will chip. When both are extremely hard, they will chip. That chip becomes a stress riser. That can lead to a crack very easily, and a crack leads to a blade failing, snapping. So you really avoid, little things happen in combat. When you get those little nicks, you polish them out. But by and large, Chinese swordsmanship, as a standard, as an orthodox method, uses a flat because of that very hard edge. Great for cutting, but has a disadvantage if it hits something is equally hard. So very interesting, I think, when I see things like this. Really very curious to see how this, especially experience how deep of a cut that really is. This weapon itself is a really fine example. This isn't your average sort of truncheon, club that just some ruffian had, or the low guy in the caravan guard, caravan escort corps. Not something like that. Those can be really rudimentary, especially those Jian. They're just iron bars with very simple grips, very simple guards, just pounded out by some blacksmith. This is fine craftsmanship. I mean, look at the fluting of the blade all the way down. If you'll notice, these little sort of beaded sections get longer, get wider, and slowly change shape. And they do that consistently. This isn't like somebody made a mistake and made different sizes. It consistently changes as you go down. And this section is sort of pulley section in between. Those likewise slowly elongate as you go up the blade. So somebody took their time. Imagine this was made on a lathe of some sort, and they slowly took that time with files and then stones, making that really smooth, nice piece. And that doesn't add a thing to the functionality. So that's just something the craftsman did to make a beautiful piece. That's implying it's not made for the average guy. Likewise, look at this. Look at the fittings here. I mean, that pommel is beautiful, that sort of pumpkin-shaped pommel. If we look at the little washer here at the end, it's not just a washer stuck on. It has a flower sort of petal shape before it's peened over there. And that's really, really well done. Hardwood grip, it's probably elm. It's not a fancy hardwood. Fluted, I should say, faceted cube section there, and then this dragon head. This dragon head is really something. It's not just a simple casting. It has really nice little curly designs and little details of his scales underneath here and the dragon's beard here, right? The scales under there, the details on his ear. So this is a finely crafted weapon. And the really cool part that was really amusing is these little googly eyes here. I'll rub these. These bits are all brass. Those appear to be copper from the color or some other alloy because they're sort of a reddish color and they move around. So I call them googly eyes. They kind of move around. So again, not something that adds a bit of functionality, but it's kind of cool, right? Even back in the day, people like to have their weapons be kind of interesting. So what does that speak to? It tells us whoever had this was somebody of rank, somebody of means. So perhaps if you're the top guy in the bodyguard agency or in the caravan escort agency, okay, maybe you have something to show off, who you are when you're knocking people around. That's a possibility. Perhaps if you're a constable in, say, someplace like Beijing or really Xi'an, some really big city, maybe you have something like this compared to the one that the other people have. Again, to show your rank. But I think something more than that. I think this was used by a soldier. Now, we don't find very many of these compared to swords. They're around. I don't mean to say they're rare, but I always figured that whatever weapons existed in the past, the numbers they existed in, the percentages of this weapon or that weapon, are by and large going to be the same that made it through to exist in our time. Except for something like arrows, which get shot and lost and broken, or things that are organic that can rot away. Metal arms, metal cold arms, we're going to find them today in pretty much the same percentage that they existed in the past, right? That just makes sense, right? It's common sense. We don't find a lot of these. So we know that they weren't used by the military, at least not large scale. Why not arm soldiers with these? They're easy to take care of. You don't need a scabbard for them. You don't have to repolish the blades. You don't have to sharpen them. If you're not a particularly good swordsman, you don't have to worry about cutting at the proper angle, getting your edge alignment right. It just, if it's a little bit off, bang, you're still whacking. It's just simply that this weapon, although it's potentially lethal, although I can certainly give up, if you hit somebody in the head with this, follow it up around, crack them on sides, I think this weapon could clearly take somebody's life, but still it's not quite as lethal, or it's a toned down lethality, if you will, compared to a saber or a djinn. It's not that it's not a potentially lethal weapon. I mean, you can swing this thing around and bang, it hits with real power. I think it could hurt somebody. Seriously, you could take somebody's life with a weapon like this. At 4 pounds, a blow to the head, a strike to the rib followed by something on the neck, that would clearly do somebody in. But swords are just more lethal. I mean, if we look at those again, look at the proportion of Dao that have made it to our time versus these Bian and the Jin, they're not nearly the same. There's a lot fewer of these sword breakers than there are of swords. So quite clearly, although this weapon can be used with real power, real authority, unless maybe you're on horseback, you're not going to find that soldiers are using this. So could be used by a soldier, but generally not. Which is why, again, I think it was probably these weapons were really carried more by the constables and by bodyguards, with one potential exception, because this is just too nice of a weapon for somebody like that. It's hard for me to see that a bodyguard or, who just, he's just not high enough rank to have such a finely made weapon. And I think there's a clue in the fact that many Chinese deities, particularly the Zhao Gongming, carried bian as their symbol because as a sword, quote, sword breaker, it symbolizes their power to overcome obstacles and negative forces. Taoist deities are often seen carrying these weapons, and particularly that Zhao Gongming, he's the Chinese god, or the Taoist god of wealth, was given the rank of marshal by the Jade Emperor. So he's depicted in armor often, not always, but particularly in armor with a bian, one that often looks very similar to this one. So if you are a high officer or you are a general, somebody rank, maybe marshal rank, this is the kind of weapon you might carry as a symbol of your authority. I mean, after all, although this weapon is not as lethal, say, on the battlefield, a general's weapon is not his bian, not his dao by his side, or his jian, whatever weapon he's carrying. An officer's weapon are his troops. Okay, so, but as a symbol of authority, when your general strutting about, carrying the weapon, a weapon that could be used to break the blades of demons, is a real good symbol of your authority. And hey, Zhao Gongming, he's also the god of wealth. So why not carry his weapon? So I think could very well have been a high officer's symbol of authority. And, if he needs to direct troops, hey, go out. I'm doing it with the authority of a god. You go do this. If I need to instill a little authority, a little punishment, get in line, great weapon to have. So these are the kind of things that I always find very interesting about these kinds of weapons. Who knows who carried this? We don't know for sure, but it's always that kind of mystery, the intrigue of figuring it out. One other thing that's very interesting about these bian is that the first core Buddhist precept is to not harm other beings, often translated to not kill or not take life. But some Chinese translations are to not draw blood. And you often go, next time if you're in a temple in China, or somewhere in a Chinese expatriate community outside of China, go to a temple and you'll see many of the door gods, or those deities, I should say the guardians that flank the main deity in the temple, often you'll see them holding bian like this, because as protectors of both either a Taoist deity or a Buddhist deity, they can strike, they can break the weapons of demons, they can control demons, they can affect negative forces without drawing blood. So that's another kind of way that, the interesting symbolism of these bian. Well, I hope you found this interesting. I particularly love this weapon, especially I like those googly eyes there. I think it's a really beautiful example of bian. Not your typical example by any means. If you've seen other examples, maybe you have one, or if you've been to a temple and seen those guardians with these, either these bian or the jian, have any other information to share, please do that in the comments below. We love to hear back from other people. Likewise, if you've got questions about this weapon or other things about Chinese swordsmanship, please post those. I do my best to personally answer all of those. When I don't get to it, I find that a lot of times the apprentice students here have also chimed in, so you get a lot of good information from the whole community. So you got questions, post them. As always, we really appreciate that thumbs up. Helps us to spread the art, helps us to get the word out about things. Sharing it is also a great way. We always appreciate those shares. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's more videos coming out all the time. Till next time, everybody, stay strong and 再见.